Noting the time and the presence of a very thin quorum, I call this meeting of the Acton Finance Committee to order. Meeting is being broadcast and recorded by ActonTV. If the one person sitting in the audience also wishes to record it, he should make himself known to the chair now. The first item is citizens' concerns, and despite, okay, how's that for timing? Noting that there are now citizens in the room, I will open up the microphone to citizens' concerns or citizens' questions. Observers all? Observers all. Very good. Okay, so we will move on to the main purpose of this meeting, which is the first run of the point of view. By way of a quick reminder, we had discussed at the last meeting about potentially changing how the point of view is laid out. We wanted to do two things with our point of view this current year, and I wish Zoom would stop crashing out on me. That's the second time that it's done that. We want to do two things with this point of view this year. One, we want to have a clear narrative for when we present to the select board and the school committee, but we also wanted to make sure that our point of view is as approachable as possible. So we're going to keep a PowerPoint format in the attempt to make sure that we are able to present to whoever will be kind enough to let us in. The previous year's point of view had gotten to north of 20 slides, which I feel made it very difficult to present in under 10 minutes. So my goal this year is to have the slideshow part of this be 10 slides, which are going to appear to be, relatively light on graphs and the whatnot, so that we can speak to them quickly, but I don't want the data to be lost. So the way I'm trying to write this is we've got our 8 main slides, and then there's a call and response. So there's the main slides, but if somebody asks for the proof in the pudding or the underlying data, the correct appendix slide will correspond to the slides that make our assertions. There is the possibility that since we did not have a subcommittee write this because we did not want to have open meeting law violations, there is the possibility that one voice may come through a little stronger on this point of view than others. And by all means, feel free to add your points as we go along. Okay. Wanted to start with a very quick review of the most recent past. The operating override last year was exceptionally close. 37 votes out of 6,290 is 37 according to the absolute final. The posted number on May 2nd, the official final results on the website is 37. The 45 that you're thinking of, sir, is probably the 45 people who took a ballot and did not bother to vote on the topic of the override. They must be taken into account and given the respect it deserves as we plan for the current budget conversation, as well as the near and longer term budget expectations. And now let me try and get Zoom to stick with my sharing here, please. And thank you. Guess I gotta share the whole screen or it's gonna just dump out. Okay. Recent past, we had a debt exclusion that started to impact taxpayers in fiscal year 21. That's when the Boardwalk campus and the North Acton Fire Station impacts started to hit the bills. Reserves. The last couple of years, our reserve use and our reserve landing has been excellent. The forecast is not quite as bright. But I want to take a moment to say, even though saying the forecast is not quite as bright, perhaps sounds like I'm being negative. This was directly because we asked them to do it that way last year. We specifically said, we're already in for a major tax increase. we were fine with using a little more of the reserves to try and mitigate the large increase in year-over-year taxes. For the first time in more than 15 years, and I would give you a more accurate number, but I ran out of data, so I don't have ALG spreadsheets that go back more than 15 years, but this is the most we've had in over 15 years. Highest we got about 10 years ago was just shy of $1 million. So this is our largest amount of unused tax levy reserves that we've had as long as I've been on the committee, perhaps as long as you have, sir.
Perhaps you're right.
And this is our favorite kind of rainy day reserve because this is the money that sits in the taxpayer's pocket until it is absolutely needed. And then lastly, what does this all add up to? This adds up to a tax increase that is up 38% over the last 7 years. And we're going to, I have not created the call and response slide for this yet. I'm taking the data specifically from the ALG spreadsheets showing what the average single-family tax bill was. I don't know why Zoom keeps crashing. It shows what the average single-family tax bills were. What I intend on doing is taking, and since I'm now sharing my entire screen, let's see if I can do this. Taking a look at the right inflation calculator. I'm sure there's going to be some tweaking on this one, but $1 spent in 2017, which is fiscal year 2018. So taking the fiscal year 2018 tax bill and comparing it to the fiscal year 25 tax bill, and taking $1 of government spend in 2017, the inflation on that government spend is 28%, whereas the increase in our tax bill has been 38%. That tells us clearly that the cost of our government has outpaced inflation. Whether or not we're okay with that is part of what everyone has to decide when they make their considerations at the ballot box, and when it comes to what items they vote for at town meeting. I personally would contend that almost 50% higher run rate than inflation shows that when inflation is high and we have to have an override, that may be true, but it also shows that when inflation was almost zero and we were still having 3.5% increases year over year, that perhaps there was an imbalance somewhere. Mr. Noon, it looks like you would like to weigh in already.
Yeah, I want to quibble. I mean, to be perfectly accurate, most inflation data wouldn't include heavy capital like building schools and fire stations, which does go into that tax calculation. So, yeah, we should probably back out to the extent we did debt exclusions, but it's still going to be, I believe, higher than the rate of inflation.
And the good news is the only debt exclusion that we did since 2018 was the school and the fire station. It's $11 million that should be counted. Mr. Jarbo.
Yeah, one other question. If we're going to use 2017 or 2018 as the base, which is, you got to pick a base somewhere. So I'm not quibbling with that. We also have to deal with the fact that in the middle of that world was the COVID pandemic and all the weirdness that that triggered, which was sort of extraordinary. So it then becomes, even the Federal Reserve Board couldn't give you a good answer on this one. Are we at the tail end of that inflationary spike, and is it coming back down? And is it going to, quote, return to 2%, 3%, whatever, going forward? Or are we facing similar inflationary pressures going forward? So we may be asked to defend why that base year, and aren't there other things going on?
Very good point. I was actually planning on putting in the 2018 number, the 2021 number, and the 2024 number. So we have three waypoints, the most recent waypoint, but for now, for when I was pulling this together over the weekend, I only got done the 2018 one, starting with the farthest back that I was comfortable pulling. But to that point, I absolutely agree with you. Doing a one point in time snapshot is not accurate. So if the rest of the committee is comfortable with it, I was going to do FY 2018, FY 21, FY 24 as the three points.
I
Yes.
was just curious, if you could go back to the inflation calculator, if you could just do the base year as 2020
Yes.
instead of 2017.
Yes.
So I think that's when everything went crazy after 2020.
It did.
So it's 21% since 2020.
Yeah.
So the
That's what I-
previous year was 7%. But if
And
you
then
look at
If you
the.
went from 2017 to 2020, it would be what, 8%?
2017, 2020,
And it would be 5%.
6%, 5.6%. Now, during 2017 to 2020, our taxes did not go up 6%. Our taxes went up
Oh,
significantly
I
more than
totally
that.
understand. I think.
And so I do-
guess
Yeah.
What I'm getting to is that this has been an accelerated period of inflation that has, and everything in the marketplace is always sticky, and it takes time to react to things. And this happened faster than the economy can handle.
Which is why
Yeah.
we were so willing
No.
to go for the override last year, which is also why we were willing to have some unused tax levy capacity. But it doesn't change the fact that, did it crap out again? It doesn't change the fact that this is something we need to plan to protect against in the near future. Yeah, it crapped out again.
Next time you have to print it out.
Apparently, next time I have to print it out. So much for this computer. Okay. So that's the recent past. Now we get into what are we going to argue about for this year? Are we going to do business as usual, do our normal 3 to 3.5% increase? What about maybe not doing that for a change and putting some money aside for tomorrow so that we lower what we spend on this current year to try and protect out larger things that we know are coming down the pike? Every year we talk about what percent increase are we going to recommend to the select board. Every year we talk about the reserves, the unused levy capacity, the debt exclusion. So what are we going to use in unused tax levy capacity this year? As I said, we've got the largest we've ever had. I suspect we may have to use some of it this year, but I would like to see it be as little as possible. And I would also like us to make sure that we're using it as a way of bridging to a more sustainable rise in the future. How much do we want to do in debt exclusion? And I'm going to jump out here and say that the two slides that I absolutely kept the most from last year are, here, I gotta clean up this. I think these two slides were the best two slides in last year's presentation because they showed that when we took out the large borrowings for the boardwalk and for the North Acton Fire Station, we had said, and I know we said it because I was the one that gave the speech, we had said to the public that we knew we were asking them for an extra cost in the short term to take advantage of the MSBA time and to take advantage of the extremely historically low rates. But that if they would look forward, they would see that debt falls off and brings us back to about where we were in a fairly short period of time. It was 3 years of severe pain, followed by another 5 years of a little more than they were before, and then bring us back down to a regular level. And so one of the things that I'm going to socialize with this committee now, and might have to do once we have our full complement, is maybe when we start doing this, when we look at this presentation, when we start giving this presentation, one of the things that we say is we do not want to entertain debt until FY '29, when it comes back down when it comes back down to the levels that we were at before. That's not to say that the level that we were at for the last couple of years is historically high. It's not. Back 20 to 30 years ago, when we took out both the public safety facility and the junior high school renovations, our debt was a greater percentage of our yearly spend then than it is now. So I don't want to just look at that slide because it's only got a 20-year time frame on it and make it sound like this is historically high. It's not, but it is high for the people who've only been here for 10 or 15 years. So present day, how much do we want to do in debt exclusion? Would it not be wiser to wait for FY '29 and or lower rates? Lower rates, new rates are currently at what, 4.4 for a municipal 5 coupon. That's not horrible, but it's not fantastic when the most you could reasonably expect to gain in a year is 3%.
As far as the first point, the 3.5% increase, as I look at our total compensation costs, and by that I mean the town salaries and benefits, plus the schools' salaries and benefits with a reduction for Boxborough share and school revenue. We're still on the hook for a number that's something like 86% of our tax levy in compensation.
That's true.
Which means a relatively modest 4% increase in compensation cost eats up that 3%.
Correct.
It leaves room for zero extra anything. And I'm not sure compensation costs can be held to 4% because it includes health care and pensions and things that typically have gone up more than that. So I don't know that the way you're presenting it is really an option. You know, if in the real world, you know, with our compensation costs being what they are, absent a number that's below 3% increase in compensation, there is no room to do anything else without a tax increase or cuts in other places.
And that's a perfect lay-in to the last bullet point on the slide, which is now is the time for us to have a very long look at cost cutting, because I, for one, do not want to go through another override in the near future. And by near future, I'm not saying 1 or 2 years, I'm saying more like 5. And if you go back to what the data shows us, and we can go back and pull out the capital bit. If you look at it, the cost of our government is still going up faster than inflation, which means that it is taking a larger percentage of the citizens' ability to pay. And I'm suggesting that, but for 38 votes, we'd be in a much different situation now, and saying, well, I don't see how we can avoid a 4% increase. I can tell you how we can avoid a 4% increase. We can bull ahead like we've been doing for the last 15, 20 years, where we got away with it for an exceptionally long period of time and a very large payout from a Superfund site. Or we can pay attention to the fact that this is coming, and we might not be as lucky next time around. And we'll not have to worry about 4% increase. We'll have to worry about what percentage of people we have to lay off immediately. I know it sounds harsh, Steve. You seem a little caught off guard by that, but you also know me.
Not caught off guard.
Very good.
And it wasn't a Superfund site. It was a potential. I declared.
I stand corrected. I stand corrected.
Well, I was going to maybe wait till you went through all your slides.
Okay.
To see if any optimism optimism crept into this thing.
I would not hold your breath for
Okay, so
optimism
I
on
was,
this.
after that little speech, I figured it wasn't coming.
Okay, so that's the present day. Then, as a point of style, I'm curious to see if, I cut out the next two bits to be, did this take? It cut out again. The next slide is near future, and the slide after that is longer future. And I specifically tried to cut these two out because of the, and I don't want to be craven about this, but the Finance Committee has always been told that we have a long-term remit, which in my mind is at least 10 years, if not 30. Whereas when I speak to elected officials, I am reminded that their term is 3 years tops. And so the expectation, what I'm worried about is making something that is
Is that PC made by CrowdStrike? Just curious.
this PC is brand new, and I'm not used to it yet, apparently. Don't get me started on CrowdStrike. That's how I was 5 hours late coming home on Friday.
It's an airport Saturday, Friday morning in Texas.
Yep. So the next slide I had was near future, which had a 3 to 5 year time frame, trying to line up with the political realities of the elected officials in town. And some of this, as you can see, has been stream of consciousness. This has not been prettied up for final presentation yet. This was meant to be conversation provoking, and I know that it takes us at least 3 meetings to go through a point of view anyway. So I was just trying to get it all down for conversations purposes from the start. In the near future, do we want to take a couple of years to wait for inflation to come down a little bit, get rates back down to that 3.5 or lower? Do we not want to take that risk because you never know what the future will hold? And who knows, 3 years from now, we may be looking at 4.43% on the 30-year note and wishing we were back down, those were the glory days. That's something we need to discuss. One thing that we have discussed in the past, and I would like to drive home this year, is that I do not want the 2 capital plans to be developed in a vacuum. I would like there to be a 3 to 5 year plan that is discussed amongst LG, amongst the 3 major boards, so that we know what's coming down the pipe from both sides. Otherwise, we run the risk of the last project brought forward is going to be the one that gets starved out from fundage. I don't want to suggest that doing this is like herding cats, but it's something that we have not accomplished in the past. It's something I would love for us to start working towards forward now. Similarly, I am open to the concept of the municipal side doing what the school side did 6 years ago, 6 years ago, which was to take out a well-timed loan and bundle together a bunch of smaller projects, small and medium projects, and bang them all out at once with a fixed cost so that they knew exactly what their costs were going to be for the next number of years, avoiding any postal step functions, surprises to the taxpayer. And then in the near future, so if this is our year for having conversations about what we can cut, what costs we can cut, then I would like to suggest that in the next 3 to 5 years, we actually get those items implemented. And unfortunately, Christie has not made it to the last couple of meetings. I know that the school committee has a subcommittee that's working on this. I need to spend more time on the municipal side to see how they're doing on it. But yes, this is something that I absolutely think we need to do because I do not want to be, not only do I not want to be having override conversations in the next 4 or 5 years, I have absolutely no intention currently of supporting an override in the next 4 or 5 years.
I think the only thing I would add to your near future thoughts is sources of revenue. So we had talked at length about maybe selling some properties when we were looking at the budget deficit. And in a 3 to 5 year plan, you could have a very reasonable assessment of town assets and see if there's anything that would be worthwhile to explore in selling, and then any other ways of generating additional revenue for the town. I think in a 3 to 5 year plan, sources of revenue are the easier path than cost savings, but you have to be realistic because every town is looking to increase revenue. But I think the asset review would be a sound one to look at, because,
I'm all for it.
because you might be able to, we talked about it at length, you might be able to get some significant cash out of it to maybe fix a short-term problem. So,
All for it for on the short term, but definitely do want to work on the cost curve moving forward. But yes, you're absolutely right, and that was mentioned in the previous meeting, and thank you for bringing it back up and making sure I get it back in here.
Yeah.
And,
Sure.
yes,
Yeah, in addition to the revenue source discovery, it's way early in the process, but the Economic Development Committee is trying to put together a master plan for economic development. Again, that may not be completed, for another year, but if we're going to be looking that far out, then the question I think we may want to weigh in on is if we can find ways to increase economic development that makes a whole lot of the other things more sustainable. So which one should we support? Which one should we go back and push back on, et cetera? So, there are other groups that I think we can discuss that with.
absolutely. On the longer term, so 5, 10, 20 years, do we want to, in the past, we've been told we have to make policies. In the past, we've been told we have to give guidance. Do we want to go down the path of trying to say that we don't want to be the 16th highest tax burden in the Commonwealth anymore? Maybe we want to target for the 25th or something along those lines? Do we want to start having the conversation about setting a target for what we're willing to shoulder as a percentage of our median family income? Or am I now too many years out and on a limb that we do not wish to be on?
Oh, you're on a limb.
And you're too far out.
But, I work with a lot of different organizations, and nobody, and I mean nobody, is doing 20-year plans. Most of us are having difficulty doing 3-year plans. The 5-year plan is giggled at if that ever comes up. So one of the challenges that we have with our longer term is, can you tell me what the inflation rate will be 20 years from now?
I'm going to push back on you and say, nobody has a 20-year plan? What did you do when you decided to take out a mortgage? Did you just say, oh, we're going to buy this house and life will be great and God will provide in 5 years? Or did you actually say, no, I actually have a plan for how I'm going to pay this 30-year responsibility?
Yeah, and part of the plan was I'm going to renegotiate when the rates come down.
To say that planning 10 years out is a murky at best is 100% accurate. To say that therefore it shouldn't bother to be done at all, I push back on heavily, because everybody who bought a house in this town, the vast majority of people who bought a house in this town, had at least a 10-year plan on how they were going to pay their mortgage. I don't think of the 5,000 parcels in this town, most people bought a 3-5 arm. I think most people probably bought a 20, 25, 30-year fixed.
No, I totally agree, and having bought back when, our economy, when I bought, had Digital Equipment Corporation employing 20% of the people in this town. The traffic jam was going south to Maynard. I was headed up 495 to Wang or down 495 to Data General. None of those companies are around anymore. So the whole notion, if you talk about, I wanted to plan 30 years in advance, sure, I had a plan. Was it come anywhere close to reality? No, the world changed in between all that. So again, yeah, when you are working on shorter term, I think we are on stronger ground. When you work on longer term, there may be guidance that we can provide, because there are some things that, we can start steering in the right direction earlier rather than later. But boy, the number of assumptions that we are not in control of. We can't control what the next employment trends are like. We're lucky if we can project inflation that far out. Boy, that's hard.
Scott?
So, in my professional experience, aspirational goals for businesses are very important. A lot of companies have their aspirational goal in their mission statement for the business. It provides direction and focus over the long term for a business. Yes, in the short run, you have a lot of variables that you don't control, and you have a lot of, generally speaking, like revenue goals and revenue targets. I see this as an aspirational target long term. Are we a community that wants to have highly taxed people in the town, or are we a community that wants to strive to be more of the middle of the pack, which I think is what that's how I'm reading it. So I don't see this as an impossibility. I see this as almost like a mission statement for town of what we want to be and what we want to focus on. I would say, we want to, if I was spitballing, we'd want to be a community that wants to that puts a lot of value in the education system and likes to support our schools while maintaining, a reasonable tax burden on the population and providing an infrastructure for new business development and, a good location for, community growth and things like that. But that's kind of how I view it.
And part of what I had in mind for this is, do we want to be 30 years from now, do we want to be a city, or do we want to still be a suburb? Because I believe the decisions that we've made this year and in the coming 2 years will have bearing on that. Mr. New.
I tend to agree with Scott on aspirational goals. When I took out my first mortgage on my first house, I wasn't thinking about how I was going to pay for it for the next 30 years. I was confident that I would remain gainfully employed during that period of time. And for me, that's worked out. Sometimes it doesn't. As far as setting targets like tax burden, I mean, if you want my short answer as to how we could lower that number, it's simple. Tell people don't have kids, because we spend a lot of money on our schools.
It's part of the reason why.
Disproportionately high. If you remember the little 10 community comparison I did last year, we were the highest percentage of our expenditures going to education. So there's a lot of that is difficult to control. Do I think we can have an aspirational goal compared to what the tax burden should be versus our median family income? Perhaps. That's a reasonable thing to try and talk about. By the way, what's your metric there? Is it tax rate or tax?
We're depending on the year, we're 16th to 19th in the highest average single-family tax bill as a percentage of median income.
Yeah. So
From DLS.
we can say we would like that to be lower, but then, it depends on how incomes flow, employment changes.
It also has, zoning has bearing on this as well. What percentage of new structures are age limited for 55 plus? What percentage of structures are single-family dwellings on a 1 acre lot versus this Habitat for All, which is going to absolutely have an impact on the number of students in the town?
Well, if you think we got an issue, I see where Governor Healy wants to turn the Concord prison into affordable housing. That's 40 acres.
At least it's on that side of, the border. We do have bearing on this. We do get to advise and consent to the town as to what we think is going to happen if we make these decisions now. And if we don't have a 10, 15-year time frame on this, and we just vote on every single zoning thing that comes along because, oh, gee, shucks, the governor's demanding it again this year, we're going to get ourselves overrun.
I'm not as pessimistic as you are.
I know you're not.
Then again, I've yet to see any optimism in this thing, so.
Spoiler alert, you're not going to find any.
I had a brief conversation with Christine about the cost-cutting initiative, which probably bears on this. And the gist of it, and again, I'll wait for her to be here because I know she's putting more effort into that. But the gist of it was we did need some kind of focus. Otherwise, you don't know, why am I cutting this cost and not that cost? What is the objective here? And among the things we discussed was if we took, and again, it's going to sound aspirational, but, maybe it is. But if you took, Acton is one of the best communities to live in, or one of the best suburbs to live in eastern Massachusetts, which is why people move here, which is why people, stay here. Then you begin using that to ask questions to say, okay, if we spend more on X or we spend less on Y, does that make us a more attractive community, a better place to live? Or again, the challenge that we're going to have is the classic challenge of connecting the dots. If that's your big aspiration, cool. How do you get from here to there? And it will be hard, but you're right. At some point, we do need a point of view so that when we get into those conversations, we can basically say, we're trying to head in this aspirational direction. Does this get us there?
So in the interest of keeping the overall point of view short, I went through yesterday, today, tomorrow, and next year, quote unquote, and then move right into our concerns. Our concerns are that we might find ourselves back needing an operating override sooner than later. I have a nice red variable XX there, and we do not support an operating override for at least the next X years. Do we want to try and lay the groundwork for that now, or is that something we could not possibly hold to? Because I put 5 in there as my starting point. Do we want to put a number in there, or do we want to leave it blank so we can say just generally speaking? Well, yes. That's a variable that you're not knowing nuance. Thank you very much.
I'd put 3, so could we compromise and say 3 to 5?
We do not have to set it right now. I'm against saying 3 to 5 because anytime you give a range, people will pick the lowest number, or they will pick the highest number to suit their expectations.
Well, I would prefer not to have to back off of our recommendation in 3 years, so a little flexibility might not be a bad idea.
For example, what exactly are we going to do if all of a sudden Conant and DPW show up at the exact same time? That would be catastrophic. Do you want to comment on the capital, or do you want me to go through the rest of the slides, Steve?
I was just going to give another history lesson. We once had that committee.
What happened to it?
The superintendent left the,
Got it.
but, yeah, it was a committee that was made up of the select board, the town manager, a member from the select board, I should say, town manager, a member from the school committee, superintendent, finance directors of both entities.
ALG light.
ALG-like, and the idea was to put together a coordinated plan. In the meantime, like I said, we had a major shift in personnel. We got a new superintendent, we got a new town manager, and while I believe they talk, there's no vehicle for coordination of capital.
Do you think it's worth trying to resurrect that type of communication at this time?
As citizens, we only get one tax bill.
That's
And so some coordination has to happen.
very good.
Maybe not on every project, but certainly the big ones.
Other concerns, growth without an understanding of possible consequences. It continues to eat at me that we asked specifically for some kind of guesstimated impact for this last round of zoning changes, and we were given absolutely no guesstimate. And I find that to be intolerable. I find that to be malfeasance of forecasting, and I don't ever want to see it again. So that's why I've been beating the drum of the per capita increase committee. But I was more polite and more kind at the special town meeting, at this last town meeting, than I feel I should have been. I absolutely cannot believe multiple calls for some kind of basic input was left unanswered, is the most polite way that I can put that. The next concern, become a victim of our own success with regard to schools. There's a thought there. There's something that's eating in the back of my brain, but I do not know how to properly describe it. So I may end up pulling this if I can't figure out how to put into better terms what I'm thinking. Something that Doug Tyndall said to me 8 years ago that I've just now trying to wrap my head around. But there's something to that. It's a pin in the dartboard for now, but there's something there. Yes,
What is WRT?
with regard to. And then another concern is that we are one of 9 voices with regard to Minuteman. By no means do I want to be heavy-handed about who can go to Minuteman and not. We're in the district. We're paying all the capital fees, but God help us. They've been a budget buster a couple of times in the last 5 years. And while it is a rolling average, and we're hopefully at the highest point that we're going to be for a couple of years, the rolling average has caught up with us. We absolutely have to stay on this. They've got a new superintendent. They seem to be allergic to staying the same size. They seem to just want to build every year. And frankly, we can't have Minuteman take up that much more of our resources when we have one out of 9 voices on the topic.
Agreed. And I think the Boston Globe story this past week about, and it wasn't Minuteman, it was one of the other VOTECs. I think we need to do a closer look on which students they're taking and which students they aren't. It stunned me that there are a lot of assumptions as to which student population VOTECs in Massachusetts, across the state, are supposed to be helping, and that may not actually be the case over the last decade. So I think you're right. It's one of those things that falls to the bottom of everyone's to-do list, and because of that, groups with 9 towns in them don't get the same scrutiny that groups with 2 towns in them do. So I would agree with you there. As for the victim of her own success, be careful, because the alternative is, oh, then we want to be a failure?
Like I said, it was a
No.
placeholder.
No.
And fortunately, we're not in a situation where the minute the kids graduate, the for sale sign goes out the way that it was in years past. But I don't want to get back to that spot either. The good news is we do have some capacity in our schools now. It was by the same reason that we were able to say that since enrollment was falling, the amount of money spent on the school district can't go up at the same rate that it was in the past. By that same, the other edge of that sword is that there is capacity in the schools. There is opportunity for more people with school-age kids to come into town. There's also, what's not discussed here and will not be in this presentation at all is the fact that if Boxborough continues to outpace us with the enrollees, that only flows to Acton's benefit over the next couple of years and has already shown to be a good thing over the last 2. So something to remember as well.
So is that an example of population growth being a plus?
Population growth is in Boxborough, so it's a plus.
The population grows in Concord?
Not my problem. Okay, so this hasn't cut over yet, has it? It's supposed to switch to the recommendations. Come on. It really hasn't done anything yet, has it? Give me a second. Give me a second. So looking at the little, so it's either the new laptop can't handle this internet or our Acton public internet is cutting in and out. Because it's, every time I look down, my internet is dead and it's recapturing. Okay, so this gets us to the recommendation slide. This is the last of the talking slides. The rest are going to be the supporting data slides after the fact. Again, call and response. We want to reiterate our reserve policy. Do we want to say get closer to the floor? Do we want to say 3 to 5 is fine, but in reality, for the near term, we should be at 3%? Or if you're above 3%, make sure that you have clearly earmarked why you're holding on these funds, because you see something coming down the pipe. Because I do not want to have 8% tax increases anymore. We've had a 7 and an 8 in the last 5 years, and I strongly advocate that we not do that anymore. Now, if that means we have a couple of 3.25s instead of 3.0, because we're looking forward to what's coming down the pipe, and we know, and we've got our eyes open about what's going on, then I'm much more willing to say we're putting money aside for a rainy day, or we're putting money aside for a rainy roof, or we're putting money aside for a specific project, than to say, oh, gee shucks, we've ignored this for so darn long, there's nothing we can possibly do, but we absolutely have to fork over tens of millions of dollars for something. It's not how I want to move things forward. And I think as a committee, we should be driving home the point that 8% tax increases are killers. Roland.
So, schools did this, a bunch of other ones, the town did this too, is we established the stabilization funds.
Mm-hmm.
And this year, when we came down to the big budget crunch,
We didn't touch the
we
stabilization.
didn't touch them. And those were funded pre-COVID.
Mhm.
We used some of them, and I brought that up. Why aren't we using those funds?
Mhm.
That's what they're there for. They're there for the rainy day, hence stabilization. And we haven't done anything to do that. So we knew that we're going to be replacing the ladder truck. We knew it was going to be $2 million roughly. How much do we have in stabilization?
2 million.
So instead, we decided we're going to go and bond it at a higher rate, right? We probably should have bonded it 3 years ago and did this because the rates were low. So I think we still need to add to stabilization funds, so when we do have projects that come from the future, we need a new ambulance, we have the 350K sitting in there, or 400, whatever it is at the time, and you pull out a stabilization. Yes, you have to go to town meeting, get the 3/4 vote, but, okay,
I think it's 2/3.
2/3,
Scare
whatever,
me.
whatever it is. But we really need to understand what's sitting in stabilization now, and why town manager, select board, were reluctant to use it. You know, we didn't have to go and tax the citizens at the 6.6. If we pulled out 2, it would have been 4.6. Or maybe we take $1 million out and have 5.6, or whatever the numbers would have played out. But I find it kind of disingenuous that we have money sitting in there that we're not utilizing.
And I would also recommend that we look at not just the stabilization fund, but clearly identify in the enterprise and revolving funds. I've been asking every time they come and give us the quarterly results, and they say, we've got X amount of money in free cash in a given enterprise fund. When it starts getting to be 50, 60, 70% of the annual cost, annual expenditure of the fund, I keep asking, why do you have so much in there? And the answer is, well, we might need to do some capital thing in the future. That's fine, but I don't want it to be we might need it. If you're going to hold that kind of money in these funds, explicitly call it out, explicitly label it. It should be, if we know we're going to need a new fire truck in 3 years or 5 years, and we're letting the ambulance enterprise fund float up tens, $20,000 to $30,000 a year to plan for it, that's fine. But don't have this be dark puddles of money that we don't have full access into, because if you take the stabilization and all the enterprise funds, yes, we did not need to have the amount of override that we had. It's part of the reason that the original $12.1 million ask was ludicrous and was not going to be entertained. Did we squeeze everything out of it that we could have? Possibly, probably. It was not an easy year. But starting now, do not come and say, we've got 50% of next year's revenue sitting in the enterprise fund in case we need it. Either tell us what you're saving it for, or you don't need it, is what I would like this committee to help deliver the message, help recommend the message on. Did you get away in?
Yeah. I want to go back to your original premise, because I think that then ties back to your recommendations. It was an exceptionally close election. We do need to note that we came that close, and, you know, I won't quibble on the exact number, but whether it's before the recount or after the recount, whatever, it was still way too close. It was less than 1%. And for us to avoid that over the next couple of years, we do need to, whether you call it tough love or fiscal scrutiny or whatever it is, we do need to send a message that, you know, there's some structural things that we've got to change. So there I'm with you. I think that will get us where we, as a community, want to go. And we may quibble as to we zig here or zag there, but you know what? Overall, I see where you're headed with the overview, and I see where you're coming down, and yeah, I might, you know, wordsmith a thing or two here and there, but you know what? Overall, you're on the right track.
No, I'll let anybody else talk that wants.
Yeah, well, that's,
We can confirm what the final
Again,
recount is after the final recount vote.
Yeah.
But I
Again,
think what you're
you
all
can look-
saying is that it's
You can
very
look at what I'm looking
close.
at. You can look at what I'm looking at and why. Again, I think we're all in agreement that it was
Too
a
close.
razor-thin vote.
way too close.
Okay, so that is the talking part of the presentation. Again, we went through it slowly because we wanted to get feedback on every single slide. My goal is to be able to present this in 10 minutes. I wrote a narrative version of this, which is absolutely lacking in optimism and levity and even an introduction for that matter. So it definitely needs to be prettied up before we send it on over. And it did hit all of the points.
Why does it need to be prettied up?
Because I'm trying to influence people, not just aggravate them. And it came to only a page. I think Christine Russell would be absolutely shocked that I was able to use that few a set of words to get all of my points across.
Is it true the whole page is one sentence?
No, it actually is carved up into paragraphs that correspond to the slides, shockingly enough.
Is that single-spaced?
So you're not
Are
speaking
you doing
softly?
Three-quarter spaced, 9-point font.
You're not speaking softly and carrying a big stick, I guess, huh?
So, again, this is the first round. Now that we've all seen it, I can send it out via email, so you can all come with your wordsmithing, with your softening, with your recommendations, with your changes for the next meeting. But I wanted to get something out there. And again, trying to do two things. I want to have a Word document that we deliver to the select board and the school committee. And I want to have no more than 10 slides, no more than 10 slides that have to be spoken to. If you want to add all kinds of things into the appendix, because I absolutely believe in having the data to back it up, by all means, let's do it. But when we go in front of the PTSOs and the Rotary and the Senior Center and whatnot, I want it to be 10 slides or less in the attempt of making it brief. How does everyone feel about first pass? Not quite as optimistic as you would like, Mr. Noon?
No. Probably about 10 or 12 years ago, when I was one of the very few voices in town that was talking about funding OPEB, I picked up the nickname in town as Dr. Doom. I will now gladly pass that one over to you. Given that this thing will get published, this thing will get presented, and people beyond the select board and the school committee and staff will listen or see it, I think the very least we can do is start with something we have often started with, which was some reassuring comments that we're not broke, that we have a AAA bond rating, that we have a 99% tax collection, that we have strong reserves, that we are funded to a greater degree on OPEB than most of our surrounding communities, and that nothing's broken except there's not a clear path forward as to how we keep doing this. There's some very good material here. Steve's happy slide, okay. I might change it to say Steve's factual slide as opposed to Jason's opinions. But, so it needs,
Happy facts, okay.
we need to put some context behind this. It comes back, you can talk all you want about setting up, putting money aside for future costs, but as I pointed out earlier in the evening, we can't fund even a 4% increase in compensation costs. So where's the money going to come from to put a stabilization fund together for the next fire engine? It's not there. It won't be there. My view is more we have to start dealing with the reality of staffing levels. And I'm not saying we need to cut a whole bunch of people everywhere, but if the cost per each individual keeps going up faster than 2.5%, then the only way to get it back under control is have less individuals. There may be better ways to do things. Different approaches to different levels of services. Wasn't so long ago, town didn't take credit cards or anything else. So there may be improvements. I think historically, when we look at staffing levels of probably the largest three groups of employees, school teachers, policemen, and firemen, we don't find that they are at a overstaffed level compared to benchmarks. So we are in a real dilemma as to how to proceed. We're having difficulty controlling compensation costs. Short answer to that is cut the number of people, but then we're not overstaffed in many areas. So how do we solve? It's a dilemma, and it's pretty hard to figure out where the solution is. A cost savings initiative is a good idea. It's the first thing we should be doing. Everybody should be looking at ways to do things either better, cheaper, however you want to characterize it. Beyond that, yes, we can set all the targets we want, aspirational or cast in concrete. But until we've solved our basic structural deficit problem, it's all just words.
And the fact that what you brought up earlier and what you just read right now is absolutely true. The structure of how the current government and schools are made at this time is unsustainable under Prop 2.5. And while I'm not under any delusion that we can stay within Prop 2.5 for everything always and ever, obviously we cannot, but we just did this and we almost failed. So we need to, if we have a structural problem, the sooner we admit we have a structural problem and start doing something about it, the better, because the inverse of saying we have a structural problem, we can't do anything about it, you're going to run into a brick wall of that override that does not pass. And then you're not cutting a couple of people in a year. You're cutting 10, 20%.
Correct.
So I'm not forecasting doom and gloom, but I'm saying if you stay on the business as usual as you are now, you're not going to like the results in a couple of years. So do something about it while you can, while the cuts may not be pleasant, but they're not catastrophic.
So thematically, I think that's the message that we should be sending.
And I'm hearing you that did not come through in the presentation. I will figure out how to make that.
Am I alone on that? Anybody want to back me up on this?
I'll back you up on it.
I'll second that. And let me tell you what I won't do. I spent a decade as a corporate speechwriter for the CEOs of 4 different companies. I've written these presentations. I've written what you're trying to put together. So I'm not going to do this because that would be wrong. This is our words, not, quote, a speech that somebody writes. But you're right. In order to get invited to present it anywhere, there are got to be audiences out there who have to say, wait a second, I need to hear this point of view. What is it they're saying that will help me make a decision? So what I would suggest, as an old wordsmith, is that if you frame this as we're going to try to provide guidance, helpful guidance, whatever you want to call it. We're facing a series of decisions over the next couple of years. You're going to have to make 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 key decisions. And here are the things that you're going to have to consider, or we're going to find ourselves back facing another override vote. We may face a no vote, and we're going to be faced with a community that we're not as happy living in. So there is a style or approach or tone or whatever you want to call it that basically says the audience here are taxpayers who are not happy paying higher taxes year after year if there are things we should be tackling now to avoid this kind of situation in the near future.
Give me just 1 second to write down this note, and then I will go to you. Not getting the point that structural is. Okay, go ahead. Sorry about that.
It's all good. I'm just thinking back to last year's point of view, and I felt like one of the objectives that I feel like this is a very structural and functional point of view, and I feel like one of the objectives that we had last year was an informative piece to it to help explain how we got, the main point was how to get from point A to point B, but then there was an informative piece to help explain to the population how we got from point A to point B. As we saw through the budget process, there was a lot of, there's a lot of discussion about what was happening in the town, and there was a lot of need for and request for information. In fact, as a committee, we provided a detailed explanation of what was happening. And I feel like if there's an ability for us in this, in a very succinct and efficient way, to show from the 25 to 26 budget what costs you can control and costs you can't control, or things that are in there that have to change, or kind of just in a very simplistic way kind of show the change year over year. Because there's a lot, as Steve was mentioning, there's 86% of what's happening is compensation, and that's just going to roll forward the way it is, and there's going to be some variation in that. But then there's pieces that could be changing, or additions. I think just if there's a way for us to simply just kind of show this is where we are, this is where we're going, and why, which is I think what we did last year, and try to succinctly say that.
So I have room for 2 more slides. I understand that that's what you're looking for. I do not intend on being as instructive as we were last year. Last year, we felt the need to educate on what an override was. In the past, we've always had a slide or 2 on what Prop 2.5 is. I'm done with that. Everyone got a crash course in what this meant last year, and at least 6,000 people went and voted, so it's fresh in their mind. Doesn't mean we're not going to have to do something similar to that in another 5, 6, 7, 10 years, but this year, I feel that we need to be a little more, I hear you, I got 2 slides to grow to try and get
Well,
to
I'm
get
not
at what
thinking
you're
about
getting at.
explaining the tax code or explaining what an override is. I was thinking more along the lines of,
You want me to show the structural problem more succinctly?
right,
I get it.
yeah. I think that's what I'm getting to. And not re-explaining what we said last year, but what the issues are.
Yep. Roland, would you care to weigh in, or are you good?
No, I was just thinking of something too. I mean, you were talking about, the puddles of money here and there. And one of them I was wondering was the parking lot revolving fund and what's sitting there.
Yep, I think they all have to be looked at.
You know, and we need to get a clearer picture, and maybe that's, I don't know if we need to lay that out in the point of view, but
Well, we've asked every time they've come and given us the quarterly review, we said we'd love to know what you're holding onto that money for, and we've been told, yeah, we'll get that to you. I'm done waiting. You get it to us now. It's in our point of view.
Yeah.
I'm done waiting.
I think we need to, you know, we need to know that, right? Other than that, right now, I really don't have any other comment at this point.
Yes, you all get to have this in your hands on your own computer and work with this at your own time. Allison, I did not mean to skip over you. I was purposely saving you for last. If you cared to weigh in, being that you're on the new side, then this is coming at you fast and furious. I was not going to make you lead in any way, shape, or form, but I do feel the opportunity to at least give you the opportunity to speak if you so desire.
Well, I certainly don't want to parade my ignorance, but I probably will anyway. So
There's-
y'all are just going to have to get used to it.
You're in your second meeting. There's no such thing as ignorance. This is how you get up to speed. Please, ask away.
I am curious if we want an aspirational tone to this, just sort of looking at comparable communities, is there any space to do that and say, like, if we want to be like this community, you know, this is what they're dealing with, or this community failed their override and this was the consequence, or they've blown past their budget forecast and this was the consequence. These are the sorts of things they had to give up to sort of say, like, here's a mirror, you know, or a magic mirror to tell you what your future could look like if we fail to cut costs now. These are the sorts of really tough decisions we're going to be making in the future when the override fails. I don't know.
I'm picturing a slide with cut down the middle with an angel over one set of questions and the devil hanging over the other set of decisions.
Are there communities where the override failed and it had catastrophic consequences? I have, coworkers that were in communities where they said the override failed, but I don't really hear about, I don't know personally what has happened there. But would that be of interest to people that look at this presentation and think, well, okay, the doom and gloom, what is the consequence?
Definitely curious to see how Westford behaves come September.
Well, there was actually a Boston Globe article on communities that passed or failed the override. Now, I don't want to use the Boston Globe as our source material. And that's not what I'm suggesting. But what I'm saying is that I know we don't want to go back and rehash who are our comparables, but if we are going to hold ourselves up to those mirrors, we want to pick mirrors. For example, we don't want to pick a community where we don't see ourselves like that. We need to take something that resonates. So I would recommend, maybe this is skinning two cats with one, but forget it, that's a bad metaphor. The communities in the Minuteman district are a good proxy that we may want to take a look at. And interestingly enough, there were a couple communities that used to be in the Minuteman district that opted out.
A couple? 7?
Well, but to me, there is a case study there on saying, okay, some stayed in, some opted out. What happened? What were the consequences? Do we want to go opt out with the other guys because they didn't see any downside? Or, oh, we don't want that downside, we better find a way to work with the committees that are still in. But, that's one application. But you're right. It's like if I use Concord or I use Sudbury, or I use, you pick it, it may resonate. If I pick Andover and say, we don't want to be like Andover, do we? It's like, huh? Why? Who are they? What's that? So sooner or later, I think you're right, but in framing this, we want to frame it in a way that people will say, oh, you're right, I don't want to be like X.
Last year, I just did some analysis in the DOR database, and what I used for comparables were Bedford, Boxborough, Littleton, Sudbury, Westford, Stowe, Wayland, I had a couple of versions with different towns. you know, I've seen, I don't know how many lists of comparable studies over the years. Everybody picks a slightly different group. But I tend to think they should be geographically near us, not down on the South Shore, not that much closer to the city. You know, the Minuteman Group is fine, except then you get Arlington and Lexington in there, which
Probably are not.
demographically are both different and both different from us. It's worth taking a look at a lot of these things. If I had to pick a town that we were aspiring to be, I don't think I could really come up with one.
And we run the risk of what we pick as what we're aspiring for may not be what the majority of the town population
Right.
is aspiring to be.
Well, I think we can aspire to be Acton.
A better Acton, yes.
Yeah. Well, no, that's, by the way, based on all the ratings that I've seen and shared with Christine, we rank pretty well. Now,
do.
we rank in the teens. We're not like number one, but we, in terms of the best places to live in suburbs or communities, so there are different ways that they lump the towns. We're at least at the upper end of the spectrum, which is not a bad place to be. We generally rank A minus, A plus, depending on the criteria. There are one place where we ranked B, and it was in police services, which surprised me. But, you know, basically it's a good community, so we can aspire to be us. But if we're going to use you don't want to turn out like them, you need to be pretty clear as to who them is and have people say, oh, you're right. They zigged, we zagged, we made the right choice.
Every single one of us found a reason to buy in Acton. Every single one of us came to this town for a reason. I don't think, with the exception of Dean Charter, I don't think there's been anyone in town government who was here as a child. I could be wrong about that. There's a reason why we're here. And I would hate for some of the decisions that we've made without any guesstimate of what the impact to be. I would hate for that to change all the reasons that made Acton so attractive to us in the beginning. And it is the second bullet point of my main concern, because I do not like the direction we're going. And I'm very concerned about it. And so, yes, I am taking a 20-year aspirational expectation of what I want this town, which I moved to on purpose and invested in on purpose to be. And I'm very concerned about where it's going. Any other weigh-ins? Knowing that we're not going to solve this in our next meeting, I do want everyone to take a deep dive on this in time for our next meeting. Speaking of aspirational goals that are probably unachievable, I would love to have this approved and finished 2 meetings from now, which is wicked fast and would be perhaps a pipe dream, but got to lay a marker out there somewhere.
Is that September or when is 2 meetings?
The second meeting in August.
Oh, the second meeting.
Okay. I just did a quick check of my email. I have not, would anybody else like to say anything else on the topic of the point of view, or does everybody want to take some time to review it at their leisure at home? Very good.
No later.
Very good. At this time, I do not have any minutes to review, so we can skip that part of the agenda. We're on to liaison reports. And I will admit, I've been out of town, a week on vacation and then a week at work. So I have not gotten any liaison reports. Greg, looks like you have something for us.
Yeah, there was a meeting of the Economic Development Committee on Friday by Zoom, so I was able to attend, even though I wasn't in town either. And they are trying to come up with a list of long-term priorities. So we're not the only ones who are trying to do the vision thing. And my guess is the select board has just adopted a series of short-term and long-term goals. And we may want to look at both. I'm not familiar with what the planning board is working on, so that's not a group, but that would be a third likely suspect of who's got plans for the future percolating that may impact all of the things that we're thinking about. So
Who's got the planning board?
I don't know.
When's our next meeting?
I'll see what I can find out.
And not to be overly cautious, Greg, but please, when you're interacting with the Economic Development Committee, please make sure that we are not looking at short-term costs with high expectations in the future. Let's make sure that there's some clear ROI in what we're doing, because I want us to be very careful about what we invest in.
No, I understand. First of all, I'm not a full member, so I don't get to vote on anything. Secondly, they've had a huge turnover, so most of the meeting was dealt with changing the head, so it was functional. But the one, I think, big thing, and again, they didn't discuss it on Friday, but I think the big thing looming on their horizon is they got a grant. They are beginning the process of doing their long-term study. That, I think, will have impact. Now, it hasn't started yet, but watch that one like a hawk.
Thank you. Any other liaisons? And Allison, did we find a committee for you yet?
Oh,
I think Christine and you might end up splitting either select board or school committee, whichever one Christine wants to take on. Christy.
You don't have to be that precise anymore.
Yes, Marianne?
Chair Cole, I can't remember the exact dates of, I maybe look at Mr. Noon, if the Health Insurance Trust met after the last FinCom meeting and the request for the additional funding. That might have been discussed at the last FinCom meeting. I'm trying to put a chronological pattern here.
I think I remember.
And so the trust had requested an additional money from the town and the schools which was discussed previous to even that last meeting, knowing that we were going to have fiscal year '24 run-out claims, which is happening. And hence the request for that funding from the town and the schools, which we're doing.
Okay.
Other than that, there's been no further reports for the month of June on the Health Insurance Trust. I met with the new chair today to hand over the all-important secret codes to DocuShare so he can do his job. But I don't believe he's planning to have a meeting until early August.
Early August is upon us very quickly here.
That's all.
He's got your contact information.
Fantastic. All I can find it.
Excellent. Okay. With that, double checking that I didn't throw out anything else on here.
And Ms. Jones be assigned a committee, or will that be discussed at another date?
We're going to give her at least another week before we assign her
Okay.
to at least another meeting before we assign her to a liaison. Gotta be somewhat nice. Don't want to scare anybody off. And then double checking the calendar, I believe we are next scheduled. I'm gonna have to double check this. Is that the 6th or the 13th? Oh, I can't check it. My internet has crashed. Okay, I will send out an email reminding people when our next meeting is. And with that,
I think it's the 13th.
you think it's the 13th?
I would be the second. Second Tuesday in August.
That's what I thought, too. Just let me know in advance, please. I believe so. Wish the internet didn't crash. Yeah. Okay. Assume it's the 13th, and I will email out confirmation that when I send the point of view, which will go out either tonight or tomorrow morning. With that, I have, yes, Roland.
So I was just wondering if the scouts in our audience tonight had any questions, concerns, any observations they'd like to share with the committee?
Fair enough.
That's what I thought.
Fair enough. Allison, we call upon you.
I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Non-debatable. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Anybody opposed? And Dave's not here, so we are adjourned.